The basic methods are not that much different from activities of any public relation officer from any big company. Say Coca-Cola, I bet. They have their own department of public relations and press relations. But the ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose is different. If Coca-Cola wants to make profit and to sell more Coca-Cola to nations of the world, the Soviet Union, the ultimate purpose of the Soviet system is not to sell anything, least of all ideology, is to destroy the civilization on which the affluence and freedom based, and replace it with a system of total control over life of human beings, the system of total exploitation. That's the ultimate purpose. My specific measures, which I was forced to do, unwillingly of course, but I had to do them just to promote myself further and further, is bribery, corruption, befriending politicians, members of parliament, influential scholars, members of civil service, businessmen. In other words, anyone who has anything to do with shaping of public opinion in the interests of the Soviet foreign policy. That would include a long process which sometimes is unnoticeable to an average person. It's a long-term process which is called ideological subversion. It's unnoticeable as movement of a small hand of a clock. You know it's going around, but even if you watch it intensely, you don't see the movement. The eventual result is befriending these people and trying to get them involved in the activity in the interests of the Soviet foreign policy. The immediate impulse when I learned that the Soviet Embassy, Department of Research and Counter-Propaganda, of which I was a deputy chief, is engaged neither in research nor in counter-propaganda. It is a department which is compiling information of private nature on individuals divided in two groups, good boys and bad boys. The sympathetic people were promoted in media and public life. The people who were opposed to the Soviet foreign policy were blackwashed, blackmailed, and destroyed, first morally and sometimes physically too. Understanding of what I was doing came to me when I looked through a press release of United States Information Service describing an incident in a South Vietnamese city of Hue, captured by communists from Hanoi for 48 hours. Then it was recaptured by United States and South Vietnamese armies, and to their horror they discovered that within 2 nights the communists could manage to round up more than 15,000 people and execute them. Most of these people were either sympathetic to United States or to the Western culture, or directly involved in activities supporting United States President in South Vietnam, agents of CIA naturally, even barbers because they know too much. They were executed, and United States intelligence couldn't figure out how could they possibly do it in such short period of time. Later on they discovered, they found out from several defectors that long before communists occupied that city, there was an extensive omnipresent network of informers who knew exactly the addresses, the names, the whereabouts of each individual who was later executed. When I turned to my own files, I discovered that basically that information exists in my department. So it doesn't take much intelligence to understand what I was doing in India. I was compiling information. Comes revolution, these people would be executed. Indirectly, I was involved in a criminal activity, in mass murder. I decided to defect and explain it to Americans, and the response I already described. I was called a paranoid. But I decided to defect and try nevertheless. There's another long story. It's virtually impossible to defect in India simply because Indian government, under pressure from the Soviet government, if you can call them government. I don't call them government, I call them junta. They adopted a law as early as in 61 or 62, after Stalin's daughter defection especially. That law states that no embassy, no foreign legation on the territory of Indian Republic has the right to extend political asylum to any defector from any country, which is very it's a masterpiece of hypocrisy. No other defector but a Soviet one needs a political asylum. If you are a Canadian or American, if you want to be nasty to your own government, the maximum you can do is just to pick up a phone and make a dirty phone call to your ambassador. Buy yourself a ticket and get lost. What happens to a Soviet defector under that law? If I knock a door of United States Embassy, by that law, the American diplomats have to turn me back to the Indian police, and Indian police takes me back directly back to the Soviet embassy. And that's the end of my defection. So knowing that perfectly well and having contacts both with Indian police and American media corps, I understood that the only way for me was to disappear for a while, and the best way I discovered was to mix with a group of hippies. Mind you, that was the time I was 13 years younger, so I looked slightly different, of course. I studied so-called counterculture in India. Sometimes good, sincere young people who wanted to study Oriental mysticism and culture and religion, but most of them were simply easygoing individuals who were delighted with exotic life and the easiness with which they can purchase hashish and other drugs in India. And sometimes they traveled Indian subcontinent without any identification papers. So the best way to escape detection was to mix with the group of hippies and travel in India until the campaign in the media and in the police search will subside. All the newspapers in India carried my picture and announcement of the police that anyone coming forward with information about my whereabouts would receive 5,000 or 2,000 rupees. Knowing that perfectly well, I just walked India barefoot with beads and blue jeans, smoking hash and enjoying life. Until I found sympathetic journalists who smuggled me from India to Greece. Mind you, that was a military dictatorship at that time. Then only I approached American CIA, and they helped me to land in Canada as a legit, ordinary immigrant. So now I'm a Canadian citizen, as you can see from my patriotic tie. Canada is a kind of middle of the road country where there are so many various ethnic groups that another strange character who speaks both Russian and English and two Oriental languages, I didn't have any problem fitting into academic circles, and first being just a student at University of Toronto and later a producer with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.